Alright, so today we're going to do 9.6a, rose curves. Alright, a rose curve equation looks like one of two options. Either r equals a times the cosine of n theta, or r equals a sine of n theta. Okay, there's lots of rules to remember for all of these graphs that we're going to do in 9.6. So here are the rules for rose curves. The absolute value of A is the petal length. Okay, so we're going to be graphing this polar equation that looks like a rose, basically. It's pretty cool. N is the number of petals. Okay, but there's a couple other rules that go along with N. So if n is even, then there are 2 n petals. And if n is odd, then there are n petals. Okay? To figure out the spacing in between them, you take 360 degrees and you divide it by the number of petals. And this tells you the spacing between each petal. Okay. Alright, then the next thing you have to do is you have to determine the start. Okay, so we're going to try to determine where this graph starts, and there's some rules that you have to follow for this. So number 1, if n is even, then you set either cosine of n theta equal to 1, or the sine of n theta equal to 1, depending whether you've been given cosine or sine for your equation. And then you find theta. And if n is odd and a is negative, then you set cosine of n theta equal to negative 1, or the sine of n theta equal to negative 1, and you find theta. Okay, there's one more scenario. If n is odd and a is positive, then you set cosine of n theta equal to positive 1, or sine of n theta equal to positive 1, and then you find theta. So if you look, the only time you're going to set it equal to something other than 1 is when n is odd and a is negative. So that's like the one rule. If you remembered these, I would look at number 2, try to remember that rule, and then remember every other situation you set it equal to positive 1. Okay, so let's try some examples. Alright, find the petal length, the number of petals, the number of degrees between each petal, or petal tips, and the starting angle. And then we're going to sketch and label a graph. We're just going to draw our graphs today in the notes, but on the quiz you'll be given the polar graphs so that they'll be a little bit neater. Okay, so we're just going to start out. We'll call this A. R equals 4 sine of theta. Okay, so each time we're going to find the petal length, the number of petals, the spacing, and the start. Okay, and for our graph, we're just going to draw in our compass points. We're going to have 0, 90, 180, and 270. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is you have to find the petal length. And so if you go back to the first page of our notes, the petal length was the absolute value of A. So A is 4, so the petal length is going to be the absolute value of 4, so it's just a length of 4. Now, for the number of petals, you have to follow the rules. So in this case, our n value we can't see, so that just means that n equals 1, so it's odd. And if it's odd, then it's just the number of petals that you actually see, whatever n is. So because n is 1 and it's odd, we just have 1 petal. Okay? For the spacing, it's pretty easy to figure out. We have 360 degrees in the circle, right? We're going to divide it by the number of petals, which is just 1. So we're only going to have 1 petal, so it's going to be spaced every 360 degrees. Okay, now for the start, we have to go back to our rules. So n was odd, it was 1, and A was positive, so we're looking at rule 3. It says that we're going to take this 4 sine of theta, and we're going to set it equal to a positive 1. And now we just have to find theta. So to do that, we're just going to divide by, oh, I'm sorry, you know what? You don't take A. So we just take sine of theta, set it equal to 1. So this is a lot easier, right? Because where is sine 1? Think about your unit circle. It's at 90 degrees. So that means that our petal is going to start at 90 degrees. Okay, so I want you to imagine, this is a polar graph, so I want you to imagine 4 circles. I know these aren't perfect, but it gives us an idea, right? These are a bunch of concentric circles forming that polar graph paper. So we start at 90 degrees. We have a petal length of 4, and there's only 1 petal. So we're going to go up 4 circles at 90 degrees, and then you just draw in like a flower petal. So this is all it is. Okay, it doesn't really matter how wide or how narrow it is, just as long as it goes out 4 circles and then it's at 90 degrees. Okay? These graphs are going to look really different than, anything you've done before. I don't think you've ever graphed polar graphs. So, okay, let's try another one. So we have R equals 2 cosine 2 theta this time. Okay, we're doing the same thing. We're going to find the petal length, the number of petals, the spacing, and the start. Okay, so again, we're just going to draw in a polar graph. We're going to label those compass points. You don't have to draw in the circles this time. I was just trying to give you an idea of what it would look like. Okay, and then we'll start finding our information. So our petal length is going to be the absolute value of A, and in this case, A is 2. So it's the absolute value of 2, so the length of these petals is going to be 2 now. For the number of petals, you have to look at n. So n is even, it's 2, and because it's even, you have to multiply n by 2. So we're going to have 2 times 2, so we get 4 petals. Okay, so the spacing, you take 360 degrees and you divide it by how many petals you have, which is 4. So we get 90 degrees in between each petal. For the start, you got to look at the rules. So n is even, so therefore we're going to take cosine of 2 theta and we're going to set it equal to positive 1. Okay, now look here. We have a 2 theta, so it's no longer equal to 2 theta. So remember, in chapter, I think 4 or 5, when we had to replace this with y. So we're going to have cosine of y equals 1. All right, then you have to solve. So where is cosine 1? Well, that would be at 0 degrees, okay? And then remember, once you found y, you took it, you set it back equal to 2 theta. So 2 theta equals 0 degrees, divide by 2, and theta is still 0 degrees. So our start is at 0 degrees. Okay, so we're going to start at 0. We're going to draw a petal length in of 2. Okay, so there's one petal. And then every 90 degrees, because that's our spacing, we have to draw in a petal until we have 4 total. So here's 2, draw in another petal. Here's 2, draw in another petal. 2, and draw in another petal. Pretty cool. Now, one thing we didn't talk about was what you have to label. So if you just put a 2 here on one of your petals, that's fine in this case because we're at compass point, so I can see the angle measures pretty well. If you weren't at a compass point, you'd have to label the angle. So if you go back to A, the only thing we didn't do was label the length, so we should have put a 4 here. Okay, since again we're at a compass point, so it's easy to see the angle. Okay, let's try another one. It's really just all about finding all of those pieces of information, and to do that you're going to have to memorize all of those rules. They won't be given to you. You have to know them all. So here's the petal length. We need to find the number of petals, the degrees between them, or the spacing, and the start. Okay, we have our graph. Okay, so for the petal length, this is why you have to take the absolute value, because you have a negative here sometimes. So we have the absolute value of a -4, so again we have a length of 4. Okay, now the number of petals in this case, n equals 3. It's odd, so you just have n petals. So this is 3 petals. To find the spacing, take 360 degrees and divide it by 3. So these are going to be spaced every 120 degrees. And now we have to find the start. So looking at this, n is odd and a is negative. So this is the one case where you take cosine of 3 theta and you set it equal to a -1. Okay, so again you have to do the replacement. So cosine of y equals -1. Cosine is -1 at 180 degrees. Thinking about the unit circle. Once you have y, we're going to take that, we're going to replace it with 3 theta. Now we're going to divide both sides by 3, so theta is 60 degrees. So our starting point is going to be 60 degrees. Every 120 degrees, we're going to have a petal until we have 3 of them, and they have a length of 4. So we start at 60. So this is a case where when you draw in that petal, we're going to label this. So this is like a length of 4, but this is 60 degrees. And this would be more obvious on actual graph paper. So then let's think about where the next one would be. It's a spacing of 120, so we're going to add 120 to this. We're going to go out a length of 4, and here is our next petal at 180 degrees. So then again, you're going to add 120 degrees to this, because that's the spacing, taking us to 300 degrees, which is over here in the 4th quadrant, and then kind of eyeball what you think a distance of 4 would be. Okay, now you really only need one petal labeled with the 4, but we did all of them, which is fine. Okay, and that's a rose curve. It's that simple. You just have to remember the rules, find the information, and then draw in the petals.